Is the audience in here mostly test managers or QA managers, individual contributors? Mixture. Okay, good. So one thing is, whenever I go to these conferences, I always say, hey, the cool thing about these conferences is you get to see your photography blown up. I never get a screen big at home, so just indulge me for a minute there. I promised Harry I wouldn't do those standard jokes, but I couldn't help myself. So I'll just introduce myself, talk about some common quality issues, talk about what I'm calling classical test engineers, talk about what my opinion of what an ideal test engineer is, developers' perception of testers, some organizational support requirements, 8 reasons why I think why test engineering is better. And this started from a conversation that Harry and I had maybe a year and a half ago, and evolved into this talk, actually. So I think my whole speaking career I could blame on Harry. And some alternative approaches that I've come across. A few retention tips, some common issues I run into, just wrap up conclusion, and then Q&A. However, I'm happy to take questions and challenges at any time. This is just my opinion, my way of doing things. Also, I should say I'm here with my colleague Nitin Akarte, so we'll have two, his approach will be a little bit different from mine. I'm sure your approaches will be different, so feel free to chime in whenever you like. So who the heck am I? I've been programming for 24 years, professionally since 1981. I've been in software tests for 6 years, and test automation for a little over 5 years now. And I've been married for 3 years, so my wife likes to hear that. That's how she lets me travel to these things, that I'm advertising her. And so my current position is managing a group of 41 engineers located in San Jose, Netanya, Israel, Bangalore, India. And what I'm working on is it's a network management operating system. I work for Cisco. So Cisco makes routers and switches. Our customers buy anywhere between a few to a few thousand of our routers and switches. Anytime you have more than that many of anything, you need software to keep up with it. And so the department that Nitin and I are from, write this software to manage the network and manage these devices on the network. And my specific responsibility is around a new network management operating system. It's basically a Java application, and distributed Java application talks to a bunch of devices at one end and has an API and a GUI on the top end. And then I'd like Nitin to just spend a minute. And also I should say that 6 years ago, Nitin hired me at Cisco, so he gets to blame every time I make a mistake. I go, I didn't hire me. So, so here.
Do you want me to talk anything?
Yeah, just the same thing. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, this is on, right? Hi. I joined Cisco about 11 years back, and more or less same background. But I don't know what language Jeff was programming, but I started with assembly language. So that really puts you apart from the current development trends, because one of my experiences is that when you develop assembly language and you start developing C, C++, and look at the code, and you realize that enormous wastage of resources while writing the code in assembly or in C and C++. And one of the reasons I'm in test engineering is that after doing development for so long, this was the area which can really give you the bird-eye view of the product, the customer, the technology, and everything in one shot. So that's one of my little short introduction.
Thanks. So I had a little different approach to test. Basically, my introduction to test was completely under duress. I spent from 1981 to 1999 as a developer avoiding tests like the plague. And I was successful for that amount of time. In 1997, actually, I should say that's 81 to 97. In 99. In 1997, I was living in Santa Barbara working for Cisco. They shut down the office and asked me to move up to the Bay Area. I wanted to stay in Santa Barbara, so I left Cisco. In 1999, I get a call from Nitin, who says, come back to Cisco. It's going to be really cool. You can stay in Santa Barbara. Life will be great. I really like to have you here. And then he said, will you be a tester? And I said, well, okay. I liked the company at that time. I'll come back and test. So it wasn't something I wanted to do. It wasn't something that I picked out, but I wound up doing it. So I'm sure all you guys are familiar with this, common quality problems. Bugs in the software are found too late. Regression bugs are introduced while we're moving along. In other words, the software itself regresses. We may have some insufficient performance, poor scaling, poor response to stress. In other words, what happens if a system's designed for 1,000 users and you put 2,000 on it? That's what I call stress testing. And poor long-term stability. We call that soak testing. In other words, we try to, in our case, it's a commercial application. It's not something we have control over the way a lot of your software is. It's more like the Google Maps software that's given out to sold to thousands of people, and we can't control it anymore. It's out. And so what we try to do is simulate 2 years worth of usage or 1 year worth of usage in 3 or 4 weeks, and we call that soak testing. I might have missed a few, but does anybody disagree that these are problems? Have you guys all seen this? Okay, good. So, so what is a classic tester in my case? Basically, they do everything manually. They come from the program space instead of, they come from the problem background or the problem domain instead of the business. And the business instead of programming or engineering. I think they're often experts in the product, and they may understand and use the product really well or understand the problem space. And because of that, they can get very good at designing tests and writing test cases because they know they've used the product, they know where it's going to break, and they know where to look for those errors. They know where those cracks are going to be or the opportunities for error. I think they can be really creative around ways of killing a project. I've seen that at the people working for me and working at Cisco as well as test conferences. People are really good at breaking the software. And they weren't necessarily software engineers or even computer scientists. When I first started testing at Cisco, one of the guys that worked for me was a marine biologist, and he somehow backed into a networking career, and then he became a tester. There's a lot of that going on. And then the next sort of level in the hierarchy in my mind in terms of automation are people that are writing scripts. So some people without a computer science background have figured out that you do the thing, you run the test the first time, and you do a terrible job because you don't really understand the application. You run the test the second time, you're doing a really good job because you understand it, it's all new, you're really glad you got a handle on it. Third time, you're already getting bored. And I'm missing bugs again. At least that's what I was doing when I was coding for Nitin. Luckily, I got moved out of the way before he noticed. And then the next level is, somebody might look at that the third and fourth time and go, I'm tired of doing this. What I'm going to do now is duplicate what the human does inside a machine. So I'm going to write some simple scripts to do the most repetitive tasks. Not a lot of software engineering, not a lot of innovative test approach, basically just doing what the user said. A typical example of this may be a GUI scripting tool like Rational Functional Tester or Mercury Interactive's WinRunner, or Segway has one, something like that. In other words, somebody that's basically coding in a high-level language like Perl or one of these scripting tools, but not necessarily doing any advanced forms of testing. So in my opinion, this is where, when I gave this talk in New York, people were going, blah, 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 blah. So didn't agree a lot. In my opinion, the ideal test engineer is going to be a software engineer. Why? Because I think that software engineers are good at making sure that a product is designed for testability right from the beginning. It's hard to understand conversations with software developers unless we're one ourselves. I think it also ensures that, in our case, we have developers doing a level of testing before it's handed off to test, a unit and integration test. And if you have another developer sitting on the test side, they can ensure either automatically or through looking through reports or at least integrating the unit tests inside the functional tests, they can see, ensure that that's done correctly. Another thing that you can do is, and this is a big point that I use when I'm trying to recruit people, is that a software engineer can design test systems at least as complicated as the application itself. One example of this is the space shuttle that is still running on the same program. It runs 5 computers that they built in the 60s, and they vote on the right answer, the navigation for the space shuttle. And it runs it still runs on a magnetic tape in a loop. And the software to test that and simulate the environment the space shuttle has to be in is huge. I don't know how big it is, but it's got a lot of people working on it. It's way more complex than the actual navigation software itself. And I think just simulators in general, flight simulators, same thing, way more complicated than the software that's actually flying the plane because you have to do a lot more work. So there's systems like that where the testing is actually where the unique stuff lies, not so much in the application. And also I say, the space shuttle worked twice out of 150 times roughly, so that's not too bad. I mean, worked 148 times out of the 150. They only had 2 failures, so they're doing okay. Is this working? Basically, also, I think that test engineers can come up with ways of simulating a customer environment automatically. I know in the case of my network management application and where Harry used to work, and he worked on the MOM application, you need a lot of computers you need a lot of users to either a lot of computers or a lot of devices to get a lot of activity running in your application. And if you ever try to keep 40 PCs running at once, you'll know that, I'm sure you guys have tried that. It's nearly impossible. You do that for 2-3 days, and one of the, either software crashes or power supplies are going out or something. So you need a way of simulating that. Plus, with you guys using, thousands, hundreds of thousands, there's no way you're going to fill up a lab big enough for that. So you have to have a system that's simulating customer environment. I claim it's easier to do that as a software engineer than not. Does anybody disagree with any of this? Think that I have it wrong? I'm happy to hear challenges because I'd like to learn as well, but this is my approach. Finally.
Okay, so,
do you have to use this?
Okay. So what percentage of test automation would you say is actually at least as sophisticated as a system under test?
Oh, that's a good question. So what percentage of the automation that I'm building, or what percentage out there in the world?
Out there in the world.
I don't know about out there in the world. I only really know about it's part of the disadvantage of my 6 years of testing. It's all in one company. And other than the conferences, where we met, I'm a little bit under a rock. And so I would say that it's still a minority, even at our level. But in my group, it's most of it. In other words, we designed a test system right from the beginning that's probably as complicated as the application itself. Why? Because we have functional tests built right from the beginning, and we wanted to reuse those functional tests in a model-based scenario. So we've basically built all that in a framework to handle all that all at the same time, as well as when you're doing, everybody familiar with model-based testing yet? Okay, good. In a case where model-based testing is, at least I spent most of my time messing around with the finite state machine, keeping that running. Every time the application changed, I had to change my finite state machine. So we wrote a little infrastructure to do that automatically for the programmer. So in my case, it's pretty automated, but my boss knew that because of this, I didn't have any patience for people that aren't software engineers. I don't even know how to talk to them that well, I guess. And so he gave me basically the guys that were from the beginning software engineers, and they wrote tools in the past, and now they're doing testing. In Nitin's case, people are more heterogeneous, and he's been having more people learn to become software engineers as time goes on. So what percentage, I don't really know. In my group, it's over 2/3 of my test team is software engineers. Ideally, I like to keep it, because our problem space is complicated, around 85 to 90%, and the other 90% are what we call, networking gurus. Cisco, you can get what's called a CCIE, a certification at Cisco. It's pretty hard to get. It's like getting a master's degree in computer science called CCIE, and we want to have a few of those around, and they don't necessarily have programming skills. But other than that, the people have programming skills. Oh, and the 1/3 that don't work for me is because we newly acquired a company that's the basis for the software that I'm writing, and in there they weren't so careful about hiring software engineers for tests. Most of their testing was manual, and anything that was automated at the company we purchased was pretty much built by the developers themselves. Yeah.
You're mentioning that test engineers are able to build these sophisticated systems.
Yep.
That are also testing the sophisticated systems.
Right. How do you test the system?
Not necessarily how do you test the system, how do you keep them motivated to stay in QA rather than going and jumping to actually building the system that they're testing?
Boy, I'm glad you asked that question. Could you hold on to it for till I get to the 8 reasons thing why I think testing is better? And I would say the short answer is that I really do think testing's better now, and we'll see why when we get there. That's a really good question. Yeah.
So in terms of building a test automation system, in order to build a test system, you have to understand the software itself.
Yep.
As well as the simulation space.
Exactly.
So how much influence does the developer on the application itself has influence on what you test?
Yeah, that's a good question.
How do you actually approach testing the software that I write?
Yep, that's a really good question, and oh yeah. So the question is, testers have to be expert in both the application that's under test and the simulation space or the problem space, and how much influence does a developer have on what a tester is going to test? And the answer is, I think, quite a bit, because the philosophy from my SVP, like our boss's boss, is that development and test for every application sit in the same room. And actually, the way he laid out my group is that there's a set of cubes on the outside and a set of cubes on the inside, and test is on the inside, and all the developer individual contributors are on the outside there. So right from the very beginning, they're trading information. The testers go to all the same training as the developers do, and there's a lot of, hey, here's my API. You should do this, or what about this? Is this a unit test that I should do, or is this an integration test or functional test or performance test that you're doing? And the other influence that they have is there's 2 places where we do formal documents. One is called the master test plan, which we do before the project is committed, and developers review that. So everybody reviews everything. And then later on, we write detailed test plans before we do that, and developers are reviewing that. So they do have a lot of influence on what's happening. I should say that in our group in Cisco, it's what's called a team environment. Everything's run by something called a program team, and it's made up of a program manager who's I call her, in my case, it's a woman, Diane Wingfield. I call her the Microsoft project expert, right? The one with the project and those weird diagrams. I forget the names of them. And then there's someone from there's marketing, product manager. He's a marketing guy. There's development. There's test. There's TAC, which is our technical assistance center support. And each group sitting around the table has an equal say in what happens next, and everybody reads everybody else's documents. In other words, everybody reads the PRD. Everybody reads the functional spec, everybody reads our specs. So, when things are running well, everybody's got a lot of influence on all of the areas. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and then I have the reverse question. Sorry.
Here, why don't you?
The other thing is in the other direction.
Right.
Now, how much influence does a testing organization has on the design requirements and PRD definition of the software itself? Now, because they know the domain space.
Exactly. So one of the areas that I've talked about is that right here on the first bullet is that a tester, their job is to ensure, since they're working right from the very beginning, is ensure that the design the developers are coming up with are testable. What does that mean in my case? That means making sure that the GUI does nothing but the GUI is nothing but a presentation layer of information, that it doesn't do any logic or any business logic, and that all the business logic takes place behind the scenes through a published API. The other things that we do is I have my team look at the PRD, which is the product requirements document. That's how all products start at Cisco. And it's basically the document, the software on the test has to meet these requirements. And it's basically a list of requirements. And so I tell them, look at that for the following things. One is clear. Do you understand what the guy wrote? Second, is it testable? In other words, you see that requirement, can you think of a set of test cases to verify that the system's meeting that requirement? If not, the guy's got to work some more on the marketing guy's got to work some more on the requirement. The third thing is, does this make sense from an overall system point of view? In other words, step back a minute and take these, a lot of times there's a lot of individual requirements that may conflict with each other, that may be incomplete, that are written by two different product managers, even though it's one product, and they sound like they're two different products. So those are the things that I tell my guys to do at the PRD level. And basically, you can't execute a project until test signs off on marketing, development signs off on marketing, development and marketing sign off on test, and then everybody signs off on development too. Everybody's got to sign off on each other's documents there. And basically, each person has an equal say of what's happening. Does it make sense? And also, I'm talking about the ideals, right? So sometimes we get into fights and the ideal breaks down a little bit, but that's when we're out recruiting, that's what we say. And so what is developers' perception of test engineering? This is what I've seen before. It was when I first came to Cisco, it was certainly like this. Testers are idiots. I remember getting that from some of those people we used to work with. I can't remember their names anymore, luckily. And I guess they were partially right, but I'm still here. And testing is boring, manual, and repetitive. I have to be honest, thought it was like that from 1980 until 2000, pretty much, till after the first year of testing. And testing is not creative. One of the things I really liked about my job in programming was that one is I didn't have to deal with people, and the second thing was I thought it was very creative. Creative ways of coming up with solutions to a problem, and I really felt good when at the end of the week or the end of the month when I went home and I really wrote some cool thing. I liked it. It was fun. No innovation takes place in testing. Testing is nothing but verifying that the application works. Therefore, I can't be doing any innovation. So testing is a necessary evil that stands between me and the world seeing my beautiful product. If only test would do the right thing, I'd get that thing out there. Testing isn't a career. Testing, you may do it for 6 months if your boss tells you to, hopefully get a bonus at the end, and then move on to the real world, which is development. And test engineers are pencil-pushing quality geeks, or pencil-pushing process geeks. In other words, they said, did you tie your right shoe and then your left shoe this morning? Because that's what the standard says you got to do. Even though left shoe, right shoe works just as good, you have to do it this way. So did I miss any? So there's two sets of things that I was telling folks in New York about this, and I don't know how, and there everybody was different companies, so everybody had different viewpoints. But I think there's some of this in recruiting and keeping people in tests that's organizational in nature. In other words, that you have to convince your boss to do, and your boss may have to convince her boss, and basically up to the SVP level, maybe you're already doing a bunch of this. First and foremost, and I feel like those suffrage women in the 1900s, you got to be paid equally. And that's how it is at Cisco, is there's no difference between a software engineer and a test engineer in terms of, I hope I'm not getting you in any trouble here, software engineer and test engineer in terms of great salaries or pay scales. In other words, we're in the same pay scales, the same ranges, and you actually get to pick your title, and it could say QA engineer, it could say test engineer, it could say software engineer, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's all the same. I think this is really important for a test engineer to feel equal to the developers, and for the developers to take on, to get the right people, and for developers also to give the respect that's demanded. Also, I think there needs to be a career track inside the company. So at Cisco, my boss has 320 people working for him. He's a director, which is a pretty big deal there. It's there's other directors actually, he has got one director working for him, and the rest are managers. There's others at the director level at Cisco. Cisco is basically a hardware company, and we're a little weird that we're software developers inside a hardware company. But on the hardware side, there's VPs of what they call quality assurance, which basically is testing hardware. And quality assurance, I think that paradigm makes a little more sense with hardware. And so there's a VP there. So the bottom line is that people come into Cisco and see that there's a that there's a track that they can go and they can make a career out of this thing. It's subtle, but I think it's important. It's also important, like I was saying before, that testers and tests in general have an equal say in the project. They shouldn't be viewed as a service organization to development. And a lot of times developers will say, just do this, just do that. You know, can you recreate this bug for me, or can you you know, set up this lab environment because I don't know how to do it. The network's kind of complicated in my case. And it's important that that doesn't happen, that hierarchy, that development's automatically better than test. And in my opinion, I don't know how it is here too, so I'm sorry if I'm stepping on toes, but just my opinion is that the test organizations should be independent of development. I like that at Cisco, that all the way up to the director level, basically the development engineering groups are a completely separate part of our business unit than the test is. So the VP who runs the whole thing has marketing reporting to him, development, you know, several development organizations, a marketing organization, some operations organizations, and independent, he's got tests sitting right there talking to him every day. And the reason I think that's important is because when we used to do it the other way at Cisco, when Nit and I both worked for development managers, it was constantly the development project was getting later and later and later, and it got down to, you know, we had a 3-month test schedule, development was 2 months late, and we were asked to test in a month. And although development managers will say, I promise I don't do that, there's always this implicit pressure to take away that kind of importance from tests. And also, to be honest, it's people, you know, that development manager is not thinking day to day about that person's career staying in test and what they're doing in test. So the bottom line is, this is the ideal. I'm sure there's other things that'll work, but I think it's one thing to keep in mind that a lot of times tests being independent of development is going to help a little.
So being independent, you mean like the reporting structure?
Yes.
Independent?
Yes.
Because they sit with them, they work with them, but they're reporting to a different.
Exactly. By independent, I mean independent reporting structure. The way we started 6 years ago was a development manager would have 20 people working for him. He'd maybe have 15 of those be developers and 5 be testers. Or he may have a bigger group than that, and he'd have 1 development manager and 1 test manager. And then that was it. It was basically the first line or second line development manager had both. And we found that we were able to achieve better quality by having a test engineering organization. Better quality and higher productivity because there's more reuse among the teams of test technology. So also, I think test engineers, in my opinion, must is probably a strong word. I think it helps to be co-located with the development engineers. I've also seen it work pretty well where development was in San Jose and test was in India, but that's under very specific circumstances where the testers are there's a lot of travel. Back in those days, when we did that kind of stuff, money was no object at Cisco, and we did a ton of travel. If we needed a guy here for 3 months from India, we just bring him here, even though it cost double his salary to have him here than there. And so we had a few leads, basically a few test leads here, and most of them in India, and that worked. But it's a lot better to have, if you're going to have a group in a you know, that's remote. I claim the way to do it is have some development and have some tests, have a critical mass if you can, and have them work on a project together. It increases the cooperation. Viewed as development peers by upper management, so I think that's just basically another way of repeating equal pay for equal work, blah, blah, blah. And also, I think it's another important thing is that I'm not a big fan of people that say they're quality assurance groups. And the reason is that I claim assuring quality is everybody's job. I think marketing, development, and test all have a significant role to play in the quality of the product. And I never really asked my boss's boss if he believes in that too, but I think he does because he keeps calling us test engineering. And we have a few people that are called quality, but they tend to be what I made fun of before as the pencil-pushing process geeks. They're the guys we go to. Our products have to be what's called TL 9000 compatible. It's compliant. It's like an ISO 9000 specifically for the telecommunications industry. And like everything in telecommunications, it's been around 100 years, and it's really complex. I don't really understand it. So I have to go to one of these guys and say, what am I supposed to do now? And is this right? Is this compliant with this? And those tend to be that's the help that I get from the quality guys. And does it really increase the quality of the product? I don't know, but it's certainly not hurting it, I guess. And they're the guys basically that's the guys that we're calling quality. Nobody else on the team is called quality assurance because it's basically everybody's job. So what about the software engineer testing software? I think I put this picture up before they accused him of being a drug addict. Anybody know who this guy is? This Lance Armstrong. He's won the Tour de France 7 times, and now they claim that the first 6 times he was on an illegal substance, so whatever. Pardon? Cancer drug? Yeah, actually EPO, which is the cancer drug, which when you're not on cancer, you're not allowed to take anymore, so whatever. The weird thing is there's now a tour of California, which is sponsored by Amgen in Southern California. Amgen's the inventors of EPO, so I think maybe it's the only people that can sponsor bicycling races now. So anyway, what does a software engineer do that's testing software? I claim we can design the sophisticated software to perform not only the functional tests, but also develops complex software to stress the system. And I claim you need a level of sophistication in that. So then it's getting to my questions of, here's where I have this 8 points of why I think testing is better, and I really do. One is, as I said before, you still develop highly engineered software. It's still sophisticated and advanced, and it's just the purpose of it that is different. Instead of writing an application that people are using, I'm going to be writing, that customers are using, I'm going to be writing an application that ensures that the application under test meets its requirements and will meet the customer demands and won't break down in an adverse environment. And I'll use these things on the phone. I'll use these things in interviews when people think they're coming to talk to as a development job. I'll use it in phone screening because we'll just ask for software developers and then start saying, oh, I've got a job that's almost like development. It's testing, but it's in a little different way. I'll use it when I'm asking when developers are inside Cisco that are unhappy with their management for some reason. They come talk to me and I'll say, oh, look, this is what we do in testing. So I'll use these points pretty much anywhere. Second thing is you get to decide what to build. I don't know how it is at Google. At Cisco, the developers don't decide what to build. It's a product manager. And they go, and the product manager decides what the product's going to do. And yeah, you have some influence to tell the guy it would be really great if it did this or that. But in the end, that's his domain, and he's going to tell you what to build. In test, he doesn't care. The product manager doesn't care. If things working, that's fine. If it's not working, that's fine. I think you basically, for those of us individual contributors, we want to do some neat thing. We basically have to show our boss that it's going to increase productivity or increase quality. And if we get our boss to agree to that, we're going to build something cool. That's how I brought model-based testing into Cisco. I think it's how you brought it into Microsoft as well, Harry. Basically, I did it in what Harry recommended as a micro project. I did that in my case where I spent a weekend doing it just myself, and then I got an intern or two to do it, and then it started taking off from there. So basically, I did something interesting by just telling my boss, here's a little experiment. It's going to be really cheap. Let's move on. Developers in Cisco, they don't get a chance to do that, hardly at all. In general, at Cisco, the ratio is 3 developers for every tester. So on any given project, the test team is about 1/3 the size of the development team. That means that the teams are a little bit smaller. I think it allows us an opportunity to stand out a little more being testers because of that. Because of the smaller team, we're less likely to get lost than the developers. In my case, there's I have, out of those 41 developers, 38 are testing, out of 38 testers, 41 people reporting to me, 38 of those are testing the product I'm working on right now, and there's about 120 developers. I don't know those 120 developers very well at all. I know their managers, and that's pretty much who I deal with. On the opposite is true on the testers. Most of those development managers know who my testers are because it's not that big a group. And so there's a little bit more visibility there. The creativity. Again, it's about the product manager telling you what to build. It's, I think, test engineering can be very creative about what they're doing. I think model-based testing is one of those examples. I think in our case, simulating our customer environment with complicated networks is another interesting place where people can develop software. And then also we occasionally run across these people, and I'm sure Google's filled with them. We probably used to have lots at Cisco. It's getting less and less now. Where we had folks that we called them patent machines. You know, you talk to the guy for 5 minutes, and he's got eight patentable ideas just coming out like this. And in testing, you know, there's a lot of those. You get one of those guys in testing, which we have had in our past, and it's just amazing. We just can't keep up with all the ideas the guy's having on how to test a product. So also, this is probably the best, maybe I should have put this in the beginning, you get to break your buddy's code. You know, what could be more satisfying than your friend going home all pious that he wrote this really cool thing, you run your automation overnight, he comes in the next day and the thing, you know, you hand him the cup of coffee and said, oh yeah, by the way, your application crashed last night, here's the log file. Does anybody hate that part of the job? Okay. Innovation, I'm not a very innovative guy. Like, I'm not one of these guys that come up with ideas all the time. I'm basically a good plagiarizer. I plagiarized all my management philosophy, all the stuff you like from Nitin. Anything you didn't like, I made up myself. I plagiarized a ton of the advanced kind of testing I did from Harry. That's basically me. But in the world of testing, I'm able to get 4 patents on testing. They're all 4 patent pending, and that's saying a lot for a guy that's not that innovative. I just don't think I am. And I think that if I can do that, then others can do that as well. There must be, it's a lot more wide open space, I think, because software development's been around a very long time. Complicated testing, especially on the kinds of applications, kinds of systems we're working on, I think is relatively new. And so I think the cracks in what we've done are a lot wider than before. Another thing which I think is cool is you get to have the customer interaction and the business knowledge that developers don't have. In other words, at Cisco we learned to never send developers to the customer site because what they wind up doing is patching something there. Nobody knows what's there. It's a little different here where you have control over it all. But in our case, we have these commercial applications and the developer is going to go fix something and it'll never get back into the mainline source code and we're done. Another thing is that the developers, it's like if you go to a cardiologist with a stomach ache, he's going to check out your heart. You know, if you have a headache, he's going to check out your heart. You go to a brain surgeon with, you know, your foot hurting, he's going to go, well, something wrong with your brain, because he's, you know, those are the developers. A tester, I think, tends to have a better, a higher overview approach of trying to figure out what is the customer doing and understanding that customer. So they're a little bit more natural a person to send to the customer, to talk with the customers, interact with the customers. And to me, it's a good break from the actual day-to-day you know, grind of doing the work. And so I think testers just get out more is a way to say that. Number 8, did I mention you get to break your buddy's code? This is the part we're supposed to laugh again. So it's really only 7. So let's see. Some alternate approaches. Any questions so far? Okay. Some of the alternate approaches that I could feel like, one is interns. I'm a big believer of interns. Anybody here an intern still in college, here part-time? Good. I'm going to talk about how we exploit you. So I would say that the people that work for me now that I'm the least likely to give up, Nitin and I are supposed to be a team and we work for one guy. And, you know, we had this opportunity recently where I could give some people up to Nitin. And, you know, I just can't bring myself to give my interns up. I don't know. They feel like children to me. They quit, you know, they left McDonald's at $3 an hour to come work for me for $10 an hour. Super motivated. You know, they'll do anything you say. It's just amazing. They're really happy to get their job. It's pretty cheap because I think at Cisco we pay them time off, but still it's still very, very cheap to have them. They're just so jazzed to get a good job that they, you know, highly motivated and a lot of high energy, and you know they're willing to do the testing is the bottom line because they're like, it's Cisco, it's Google, I'll test, I don't care, it's way better than flipping burgers, and what we try to do when we can, you know, since 2000 we haven't done too much of this at Cisco, but we try to convert people to full-time when they graduate. And then by that time, we've had people in test for 2 or 3 years, and they see all of these things I'm talking about, and they're a lot less likely to leave, or a lot more likely to hang around, because they've got that experience. At first, they couldn't leave, and it's kind of like me. I couldn't leave if I wanted to work for Cisco in Santa Barbara, and after a while, they like it better. It's not everyone, but it's most people. And that's why I said they might enjoy developing this automation. And I think there's basically 2 interns that are still working at Cisco that started with me, I think, 5 years ago, and they're really great. They're still very highly motivated, and they're shooting right to the top. Another guy that I don't know how we talked him into coming. His wife works here now. This is when he was single. He used to work for me, and he works for Nitin now, and figured, yeah, I'll take the test job. He was right out of school, and it was a similar thing. You get right out of school where he wanted to get in Cisco really badly, and now he's pretty much one of our most creative testers that we have. You know what I'm talking about? And so what's the second alternative approach I found? One is, and this I haven't done, but some of Nitin's team has done, where they go, just come to us, test first, develop later. Stay with me for 18 months. That's all I'm asking. I guarantee you can move over to development if you like. It turns out that very few people wind up wanting to move. In the one case we have where I have the most data on this is one team in RTP, it's John Beck, and he said that he was surprised at the end of the 2 years that out of the, I think it was about 10 to 15 people that he did it, 1 switched to development. And that's a pretty good rate. And then the thing is that he didn't even mind if they're switching to development, because then you've got a tester-friendly developer there, a guy that's been in the trenches of testing who's now doing development. But it turns out when we use this approach, people don't want to move that much because they also see the advantages. Retention. So I think it's really important that the leader, the manager, enjoy testing. I think you have to have people that like it better than development. Otherwise, if they're just faking it, well, I remember Casey Kasem, this guy who used to do the top 40 stuff when I was a kid, he said, the most important thing in show business is to be sincere. And once you can fake that sincerity, you have it made. So same thing here. And I think, though, the leader really has to enjoy their work. And another thing is, I think it's important to make time for training, no matter what you're doing there. It's probably true in any job, but it's really important in a test job because we have to understand the customer space a lot better than the developers do, and we need to do that, as well as maintain our software engineering skills, which in the Java world, how many people testing Java applications here? Anybody? Yeah, so the Java world has this ethos, of basically lots of people contributing all the time, and there's always a new data structure coming out because it's an interpreter. It's not really a language. There's always some new data structure, some new approach, and you got to keep up with that. J2EE, blah blah blah, web services. There's always new things happening. It's good. It's also a place where sometimes people want to learn the business skills. In other words, learn business itself. Nitin had a guy that 3 years ago decided he wanted to get an MBA, and so he got that, and his master's thesis was basically his job at Cisco on testing inside, using it for a master's thing. So that was another way to keep this super sharp guy, one of our top 10 performers, interested in the job by continuing the training. And also management and leadership skills. People want to move up to management. People want to take technical lead skills. And there's, should make time for that training as well. Any questions? Challenges? Few more. Another thing that helps keep testers around is, like we were talking about before, involve them very early in the test cycle. So at Cisco, basically, as soon as the idea comes up that, hey, from now on we're going to use IBM Web Services for our web application, the developers go off and learn that, so do testers. Basically, every class the developers go, the testers go. As a matter of fact, when we went to purchase this company I was involved with, it used to be called Sheer Networks. On the very first flight, I went to do the technical due diligence, I went over there as a tester, and I was the test guy. And so that shows, you know, that means that the organization cares enough about looking at their test organization when they want to buy as their development. So it's a way of keeping the testers interested. I went over there, couldn't figure everything out, so I had to send some of my guys from India to help dig out some information. And then the next thing I hear was from development individual contributors complaining to their manager about how come test keeps going to Israel to evaluate this company and development hasn't. So involving testers early helped them a lot, and certainly it pissed off developers, which is probably even better than helping testers. I'm teasing. If development is researching or training, so this second bullet is what I've said before, basically simultaneous training. What are some of the common issues? I don't get the respect I deserve from the developers. Those managers, have you ever heard that before? Who hasn't heard it before? You have never heard that? Oh, you're wonderful, wonderful developers here. So I used to get that a lot, and I go, you know, part of it is you have to earn it, right? You have to show the guy that you're, the guy or girl, that you're as good as him or better than him or as smart as him or whatever. So I think that's really important to do. Another thing I get sometimes is I'm not invited to the development meetings. Well, my answer too is, you know, again, what did you do? Did you talk to the manager? Did he say you can't come to those meetings? Did you talk to his boss? Did he say you can't come? Most of the time, or maybe you didn't even talk to the guy running the meetings. Most of the time, they're like, sure, come to the meeting. We'd like to have you sit in. Maybe you'll have some good input every now and then. So a lot of times, it's basically around making our own life a little bit more interesting. I think that's the kind of coaching I wind up doing. Development wants me to perform the XXX boring task. I used to get that a lot. I think, though, sometimes there's just a little bit of that a bunch of development, a bunch of testing is just boring. You know, sometimes that's what it is. It's mundane. But at the same time, you know, if we teach developers and if we create tools and create ways of automating that boring task, we're not going to have to do it. So that's one way of looking at that. And then also we need the organizational support to make sure that test isn't viewed as a service to the developers. So just a recap is I claim the best test engineers are going to be software engineers. Organizationally, if it's not the case already, elevate the level of test engineering to the software engineer. I think test engineering should have its own career path. And I think it's okay, and this is something I didn't talk about, it's okay to move back and forth. It's really helpful to have developers be testers, testers be developers. I think Harry's mentioning in Microsoft, that's a normal thing. In our case, in Cisco, it's not normal to move back and forth, but when we find people either way, we encourage that. And that's all. Any questions? Did I finish on time? Look at that. How do we get questions from Kirkland? Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, I don't think they were able to call in, so they're not watching.
Oh, they're not watching it.
There was issues.
Oh, okay. Good. I'm glad we're not the only ones that have problems with that. Yeah. Yeah.
You were talking about some people being your top testers.
Yeah.
I was just wondering how you judge that.
Okay. So the one who bribes me the most? So that's a good question. So we have, at Cisco follows, this is no secret, the Cisco follows a General Electric model for ratings and rankings. So everybody at Cisco gets a rating, 1 to 5 ratings, and then everybody in a BU and a grade level, within a grade level, gets ranked as well. And there's criteria to follow at each level. So we will have things like, and it's standardized across, I don't know if it's standardized across all of Cisco, but it's certainly standardized among the 350 testers we have and the 1,800 developers there. So I think the top 10% wind up being the people that can out-develop the developers. They can understand the customer space better than the customers do. They can design test cases and test systems like there's no tomorrow. They're bringing new and innovative ways of finding some bugs. A lot of times it's a matter of attitude where it's like they never say no. It's always can do. You know, it's like, you know, Praveen, I'm having this big problem here. You know, this we have a bug and it's crashing once every 3 weeks and it's not happening often enough to reproduce it. Can you go after that thing? And he'll say sure. You know, and it goes after it. So I think it's also people that get along well with everyone around them. They tend to do that. I think they tend to do all of these things right in our situation. Am I missing any, Nitin?
And then for people who really bring the multi-talented skill. For example, in Cisco, we have a little slightly different area where a company like Google, we are focusing on the application and software, right? We also have to focus on the network aspect of it, because network is the entity we manage with this piece of software. So along with the software skill set, we also need a lot of other skill sets, like network configuration, technologies used in the market and all that. So we basically take the whole aggregate skill set and then we raise the people. Of course, based on the performance.
And in the end, we're supposed to say results. You asked about the top 10. Yeah.
So hardware testing has
Yeah.
always kind of had a better reputation
Yeah.
than software testing. Do you think that is part of why it's easier to sell test engineering at communications companies?
That's a good question. I don't know, because even though I'm at basically a hardware company, I'm 100% software. I'm a web application. So my interaction with the hardware BUs is very, very little. And we've had, just recently, we've basically had a move over into our organization from a director of test who came over to software, and he brought a couple of his senior people there. And that's really our first interaction in the last 6 years with people from testing iOS software in a hardware world. And you know, I know that they also have a long history of software development over there, and probably because that's the only way to test the software. When it's iOS software, it's basically an operating system. You have to automate that testing. And so they have a high degree of skill there. I think in general, I think this is going to work for Google also, if it hasn't already. It's the, one of the things we do, and I meant to put this in here because this is specific to an organization, especially when you're overseas, but I'm sure it works here, but even more so in India, overseas, people care about the prestige of the company they're working for. And you know, Cisco has a great reputation in India. When Cisco calls, or a recruiter calls Cisco, people jump at that. I'm sure Microsoft does. I'm positive Google does too. And I would use that as an advantage and say, you know, and we've seen that before. People can work at Infosys or Wipro or Arnold's Tractor Company or whatever, but working at one of these big American companies, HP, Intel's really big over there, Microsoft's getting big, Google, Cisco, all these guys have a lot of prestige there. It's important for people, you know, and I learned this my first trip to India. The Indian manager sat me down and said, you know what, this engineer, he's here to please his mother. And it's important, and if he, I'm not kidding, that's what he said. And he said if his mother doesn't hear that he's got promoted in a year, she's going to want to know why that happened, and he's going to have to answer. The same thing is if the engineer's mom knows the name of the company he's working for, or she's working for, it makes it that much easier. So I would definitely, when we go overseas to recruit, I definitely would use that. You know, if you have, I'm sure you thought of it, but that prestige, you'll see, is a big deal. Yeah.
Very linked to this question is how do you, in your experience, how do you convince software engineers overseas, say India is an example.
Right.
QA is different. In India, QA is perceived in a different way.
Yeah.
So how do you push this message across to software engineers, saying, okay.
So the one thing is I tell them that's a good question. I don't have to repeat your question to them, do I? Okay. So the I think that those 7 points is one thing. There's several aspects. One is that when we hire people right out of, we used to hire them, when we hire them out of school, we don't wait till they graduate. We go in as, we get them as juniors, and we don't tell them specifically what they're going to do. And then I think maybe I was talking about this before, and we euphemistically line them up in a big line and go developer, 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 test, developer, 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 test, and all the techs go, oh darn, you know. And so then they're here, and it's my job to cheer them up a little, pick them up off the floor and go, don't worry, let's clean it off, you know. And so that's one aspect. And then also what I do is when I'm searching for resumes, I just go for the software development resumes. Sometimes I have a little test experience, that's fine, but I go for the software development resumes. I basically go through those 7 steps, using the fact that it's Cisco to leverage what I'm there. and that I'm there. And I've noticed too, overseas especially, what people like are people that they can relate to. A developer will take a chance on tests if they like who the leader is, if they like the company that they're working for, if it just seems like it's a good place. They interview. Another thing is, at Cisco, you have to interview 10 people. You have to interview with 10 people in order to get a job there. That's good for the company, but it's also good to give people the person coming on board a sense of, yeah, I like these people. So in the end, I'll take this chance that maybe development is better. Am I successful with? Test is better. Am I successful every time? No, not even close. And especially in India right now, especially in Bangalore, it's a very hot environment, very hard to hire people. So we go through, and a lot of junk resumes. Yeah, a lot of junk. So we go through a ton of junk resumes. We get to pretty good candidates, and I'd say even half of the candidates that we want to talk to won't come in for an interview when they find out it's a test job. So it's absolutely taking more work than development in the beginning, but it's doable from these things. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, the two basic things is, first of all, we stop calling QA, because that creates a very different impression. Especially in a place like India, if you say QA, they don't relate that with the engineering. And second, the pitch we usually say, which is the fact that you join the engineering, like development engineering, you have very narrow focus of what you will be doing in a big product. You join test engineering, you get the bird eye view, plus you are in-house customer. You get to know the customer and the industry problems. That has some success right there.
Plus, I'll come home and eat dinner with your family. That helps a lot too. And when's your wedding? I'll come to that.
What do you call it instead of QA?
Test engineer. Yeah. We're testers or test engineers, and we have developers or developer engineers. Yeah.
Your interview, you asked them generously. You said you're looking for developers, right?
Yeah.
How about your interview? Are you asking them for questions?
Yeah, so once people are interested, then we have to do the other side, right? What I'm mostly talking about is the sell side, and you're asking what about the buy side, or maybe it's the other way around. And so the buy is a similar, in my experience, a similar interview process to the software developers. What are the software development skills? In our case too, because it's networking and they teach networking in schools now, a lot of times people put something on their resume, and I want to make sure that they know something about what's on their resume. And so we'll ask questions about that as well. One of the guys, actually maybe this is what you're hitting on, one of the feedback that I got from in New York last week was that, hey, you're dismissing the skills of a test engineer, which are different from a software engineer. In other words, software engineers build stuff, test engineers break stuff, and it's a different skill set. And there may be some truth to that, but I don't ask for that in the interviews. And I'm claiming that it's not really a different skill set, it's just a different orientation to the same problem. In other words, if one person's looking at breaking it, one person's looking at fixing it, and they both do that from similar backgrounds, they're going to come up with higher quality products.
The other question is, at Google, developers write their own unit tests.
Yes.
So I'm not sure if that's what it's.
Yeah, that in our environment, you're saying they do that here? Yeah, in our environment they do that too. And one of the things I ensured was, when we first started this, Nitin was the guy who introduced developers have to write unit tests. It was the first test organization to do that. And what they did the first time was, correct me if I'm wrong with this memory, is they sent us a bunch of paperwork about how their unit tests work. In my group, we took that one step further. We basically, like I said, plagiarized everything he did. And now we just integrate their unit tests into our functional tests. So a build completes, we automatically kick off the unit tests. Those complete well enough, we have certain criteria for that, we automatically kick off our functional tests. That completes, we'll start up the model-based testing. Good questions. I'm glad there's not such a minority of people sleeping right now. Anything else?
Okay, well.